The Arctic cold doesn't care about politics. At 30 below, with the wind screaming across the frozen fjords of northern Norway, the only thing that matters is who stands beside you. And right now, 32,000 NATO troops are standing in that darkness, tanks grinding through ice, boots sinking into snow, commanders running live-fire drills in conditions that would break most armies before the first shot is fired. This is not an exercise. This is a message. The message is aimed directly at Moscow, and it says, "We are ready." But something happened in that frozen landscape that no one saw coming. While those soldiers slept in sub-zero tents, while Canada's Prime Minister stood shoulder to shoulder with Germany and Norway, sending a unified signal of deterrence, another move was being made, quiet, deliberate, and devastating to the alliance that those troops were there to protect. Here's what you need to know. Overnight, without warning, without debate, Donald Trump lifted sanctions on Russian oil. Let that sink in for a moment. 6 G7 nations said no. One said yes. You already know which one. This wasn't confusion, this wasn't a miscommunication or a staff error. Trump sat in that G7 meeting. He listened to every single leader warn him in explicit terms. Do not give Russia breathing room. Not now. Not while Ukraine is still bleeding into the 5th year of a war that has already killed hundreds of thousands. The British Prime Minister laid out the intelligence. The French President talked about battlefield momentum. Germany's Chancellor, standing right there in that Arctic base just hours earlier, made the case that lifting sanctions now would be a gift to the Kremlin, and Trump nodded. He heard them, and then he did the exact opposite. So ask yourself this, and make it personal. If your closest ally looks you in the eye, agrees with you, and then stabs the deal in the dark hours later, what do you call that? Strategy or betrayal? Because what happened that night wasn't just a policy shift. It was a message to Europe, a message to NATO, and most importantly, a message to Canada standing out there in the Arctic cold, with its troops freezing on the front line of a new Cold War. And here's the real question. Why would Trump risk blowing up trust with every major ally just to throw Russia a lifeline? Stay with me, because what happened next in Norway changes the entire game. The reaction was explosive, and honestly, completely predictable if you have been paying attention, because this wasn't just about one decision. This was about a pattern that has been building for years, and now it is impossible to ignore. Germany did not stay quiet. The Chancellor, standing right there next to Canada's Prime Minister at that Arctic base, publicly slammed the move. No sugarcoating, no diplomatic fluff. 6 out of 7 leaders made it crystal clear. Lifting sanctions now helps Russia. Period. End of discussion. 6 against 1. Think about how rare that is. These are countries that argue about everything. Trade, defense budgets, climate policy, agricultural subsidies, you name it. But on this, they were unified, locked in, no room for debate. And Trump still walked away from the table and did exactly what he wanted. That is not diplomacy. That is unilateralism at a scale that NATO has not seen from a sitting American president in decades. And here is where it gets uncomfortable. This is not new behavior. This is the same playbook over and over again. He broke ranks on tariffs. He broke ranks on Greenland. He broke ranks on Ukraine support. And now he breaks ranks on Russia sanctions. The one line that NATO allies said was non-negotiable. At some point, you have to stop calling it unpredictability. This is a strategy where America does not just lead differently, it moves alone. No consultation, no alignment, no accountability, just unilateral decisions that force every ally to scramble and react after the fact. So let me ask you something. If you are sitting in Europe right now, if you are watching this unfold in real time, how many times can you be blindsided before you stop trusting the person at the table? Because that is what this really is. Not a policy disagreement, not a one-off mistake. This is a fracture, a visible, undeniable crack running straight through the heart of the Western Alliance. But here is where the story takes a turn that nobody in mainstream coverage is explaining properly. Because while Europe was furious, while headlines were screaming about division, something else happened in that same frozen corner of Norway. Something quieter, more calculated, and potentially far more dangerous to the balance of power. Canada did not panic. Canada adapted. And what happened next? That is where the numbers start telling a completely different story. Now let's pivot to the economic front, because this is where the media tried to trap Canada. And honestly, for a moment, it looked brutal. 84,000 jobs lost in a single month. That headline hit like a hammer. Canada's economy is in trouble. The system is cracking. You have heard it all. And then right there on camera in Norway, a journalist pushed hard. No softballs, no sympathy, just a direct shot. How do you explain losing 84,000 jobs? This is the moment most politicians stumble. They dodge, they spin, they deflect. But Prime Minister Carney did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He did not get defensive. He just pulled out the numbers. And what came next completely flipped the script. Over the last 6 months, Canada did not collapse. It added over 80,000 net jobs. Not projections, not promises, real numbers, verified by Statistics Canada. And then came the comparison that nobody expected. The United States, the economic giant, 11 times the size of Canada, added just 6,000 jobs in that same period. 6,000, let that sit for a second. And it gets worse. In that same brutal month of February 2026, the US did not just struggle, it lost 92,000 jobs, more than Canada in a much larger economy. So suddenly, that 84,000 jobs lost headline. It does not look like collapse anymore. It looks like a correction inside a much bigger trend. This is what the mainstream coverage buried. They gave you 1 month, one number, one narrative. They did not show you the full board. Carney did. Calm, precise, almost surgical. Wages up 4.2%, the fastest growth in years. Unemployment at 6.7%, still lower than when he took office. And yes, pressure from US trade actions creating turbulence. He did not deny it, he owned it, but he reframed it. This is not weakness, he implied. This is adjustment. A country absorbing shocks and repositioning itself. So now ask yourself the question again, but this time with all the facts on the table. Is Canada falling behind, or is it quietly outmaneuvering a larger, louder neighbor that just lost control of its own numbers? Because if you think this is just about jobs, you are missing the bigger move. The real shift is not happening in the labor market. It is happening on the map, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let's talk about the part almost nobody is explaining. And once you hear this, the entire Arctic suddenly looks different. Canada is not just some country sitting next to the United States. It controls 40% of its landmass and 75% of its coastline in the Arctic. And here is the detail that should make you sit up straight. Canada shares a 3,000-kilometer Arctic boundary with Europe. Not metaphorically, not politically, geographically. 3,000 kilometers connecting directly to the European Union through the high north. And most people have never even heard that said out loud. So when Trump starts talking about Canada like it is just the 51st state, when he questions whether Canada can defend its own north, he is not just poking a neighbor, he is destabilizing a critical NATO frontier that links North America to Europe's entire security architecture. Now, suddenly that image in Norway makes a lot more sense. Germany's chancellor did not fly into the Arctic for a photo op. Norway did not host 32,000 troops from 14 nations for symbolism. That frozen battlefield, that is a shared line of defense. And Europe knows it. And here is where things get even more interesting. While Washington was busy making unilateral decisions, Canada was making structural ones, quietly, deliberately. A $40 billion submarine program, 12 submarines, final bids from Germany and South Korea. Norway deeply involved. Notice anything missing? The United States is not even at the table. Let that hit. The Pentagon is watching one of the largest defense procurements in modern Canadian history unfold, and they have zero say in it. That is not an oversight. That is a choice. Add to that $35 billion in Arctic infrastructure investments announced the same week. Bases, systems, capabilities, real assets, not speeches. This is not theory anymore. This is steel, concrete, and alliances being built in real time. And when a Norwegian journalist finally asked the question everyone was thinking, can the United States still be trusted in the North? Carney's answer was almost too perfect. He said yes, and then he paused, and then he corrected himself. Because what came next mattered more than that one word. Canada is not waiting anymore. It is not asking for permission. It is taking control of its Arctic defense, expanding partnerships with Germany, Norway, the Nordic and Baltic states. So here is the reality shift. Canada did not respond to pressure with words. It responded with action. And now we are staring at a new alignment forming right in front of us. The only question left is how long can two systems exist at the same time? Now we arrive at the question that nobody in Washington seems ready to answer, but everyone else is already thinking about. Can these two realities actually coexist? On one side, you have NORAD, the backbone of North American defense for over 60 years. Fully integrated, deep trust. Canada and the United States watching the skies together every single day. That system has not disappeared. It is still there, still operational, still critical. But on the other side, something new is rising. Canada is pouring $35 billion into Arctic defense, locking in a $40 billion submarine fleet with partners that are not the United States, expanding military and economic ties with Germany, Norway, Japan, South Korea, even Australia. This is not symbolic diplomacy. This is architecture built piece by piece, decision by decision. And here is the part that should make you pause. This new coalition is not being built against America. It is being built without needing America. That is a completely different game. For decades, the assumption was simple. If you wanted security, you went through Washington. If you wanted trade stability, you aligned with Washington. There was no alternative. Now there is. So let's break it down clearly, logically, with no spin. Option 1. Canada walks the line. It keeps NORAD, keeps the US partnership alive while simultaneously deepening ties with Europe and the Pacific. A balanced strategy, more partners, more strength, no dramatic break. That is the optimistic view. But then there is option 2. A line gets crossed. Because what Trump just did, breaking with 6 allies overnight to give Russia economic breathing room, that is not a minor disagreement. That is a signal, a warning that alignment with Washington is no longer guaranteed. And if you are a country investing tens of billions into your own defense, can you really afford to depend on a partner that might walk away the moment it is convenient? That is the dilemma, not hypothetical, not future tense. Right now, because while Trump chose to stand alone, Canada made its choice in public, on camera, in the Arctic cold, standing with the other 6. That is not a small thing. That is the foundation of a new geopolitical reality. And the rest of the world is watching. European capitals are recalibrating. Asian allies are taking notes. Even within the US military, there are quiet conversations happening about what happens when the commander-in-chief makes decisions that no ally can predict or trust. Let me give you one more layer that the headlines are missing. This is not just about defense. It is about economics, energy, and supply chains. When Trump lifted sanctions on Russian oil, he did more than upset diplomats. He opened the door for Russian crude to flow back into global markets at a time when Europe is desperately trying to cut its energy dependence on Moscow. And who benefits from that? Not Germany, not France, not the UK. Russia benefits. And in the long run, so do US oil companies that want to compete with a resurgent Russian energy sector. But Canada? Canada has something else. It has the 3rd largest oil reserves on the planet. It has critical minerals that every Western defense supply chain needs. It has uranium, nickel, cobalt, and rare earth elements that Europe and Asia are scrambling to secure. And it has a prime minister who just demonstrated on live television that he can stand in the cold and make the case for a new kind of partnership, one that is not dependent on the whims of a single unpredictable ally. So here is where we are. The old playbook is gone. The assumption that America will always be the reliable partner, the anchor of the Western alliance, that assumption has been tested to the breaking point. And what replaces it will define the next decade. For Canada, the path forward is clear but not easy. It means investing billions in defense while also managing an economy under pressure. It means keeping NORAD alive while also building new bridges to Europe and the Pacific. It means being honest with the American people about what is at stake, even when Washington does not want to hear it. For the rest of NATO, it means waking up to a world where the United States is still powerful, still necessary, but no longer sufficient. That is the new math, and Canada is already doing the calculations. So here's